A warm welcome back to GlobeTrotting. The 777-10 was studied to enhance Boeing's already announced 777-9, which would help it compete with the A350-1000 and obviously replace the 747. The 747, known as the Queen of the Skies, was pivotal in redefining air travel. Development for this plane began over half a century ago, and since its launch, we've seen many variants. However, as airlines have gravitated towards more fuel-efficient and therefore versatile planes, the once dominant 747 is becoming less prevalent. In a world where airlines are now saying farewell to their 747s, question marks over a replacement are ever so present. This was magnified further by Boeing's decision not to re-engine the 747 after its Dash 8 model failed from a commercial standpoint. Following the closure of the 747 production and the development of the upcoming 777X long-haul jet, could a prospective 777-10 that was once studied be the long-awaited answer to replacing the Queen? Well, the idea of a 777-10 emerged many years ago as a prospective variant that would directly respond to the launch of the 777X, the desire for high-capacity planes. Furthermore, such a prospective variant would have addressed the ever-emerging also and reliable A350-1000, which is broadly considered to be the competitor to Boeing. Building upon the Dash 9, the Dash 10 would add capacity by stretching the fuselage to accommodate an estimated 450 passengers. This final figure, however, would depend on the airline's configuration. Thanks to this sheer capacity, a prospective stretched variant would fill a gap left by the outgoing 747, at the time, which in the mid-2010s was struggling to attract any formal interest, with the freighter program certainly leading from the front. Boeing has not officially committed to developing a 777-10, however, one of the most important responses for this prospective plane came at the 2016 edition of the Farnborough Air Show, where Boeing basically confirmed that a 777-10 would be technically feasible. And at the time, the CEO said that such a variant would be very easy to implement if they wanted to. So if an airline basically came forward wanting more capacity, Boeing would be able to proceed with it. Despite the relative ease with which a development of the 777-10 could occur, the plane maker ultimately found itself in a very different position as the years progressed. During this period, Boeing hadn't seen both MAX jets go on to crash. Many internal issues hadn't come to light, production issues hadn't emerged, and there was no fractures in its culture. While maybe that was all brewing, it certainly hadn't reached a public level. However, for a prospective 777-10, arguably one of the biggest impacts would have been delays to the 777X that we've seen take place. The issues above, complicated by Boeing's ability to deliver a 777-10, would eventually take over the plane maker. The flagship variant, the 777-9, has faced repeated delays to its certification process, and now it is expected no earlier than 2025. Again, that is always going to be subject to change, and this can go for any aircraft type, not just the 777-9. These setbacks have been on Boeing, as the heightened scrutiny from regulators following the MAX crisis and technical challenges have been present. Regulators want to ensure that the aircraft being built is a safe one, which is going to take time. The drawn-out certification process has delayed that EIS date, draining Boeing's resources, and on top of that, tarnished its reputation, with airline customers expressing their own public frustrations. Adding a new variant like the 777-10 would at this point come at the worst possible time, and drain those depleted resources I mentioned just before even further. And such a stretch would also require additional certification efforts, which would come when the 777-9 still can't get approved, and complications regarding certification can't be understated. For Boeing, things are very different. Launching new programs are not part of their short-term vision, so it isn't just the certification troubles, it's the newly appointed CEO Kelly Ortberg stating that finances were so strained that a new plane just wouldn't be possible, period. Well, while feasibility is fantastic, the market dynamics for a Dash 10 must also be considered, especially when responding to that question of can it replace the 747, which was incredibly successful in its heyday. While the dynamics for what airlines require has shifted quite dramatically. Airlines today are prioritizing things like flexibility, lower operating costs, and obviously meeting their sustainability goals sooner rather than later. Therefore, for ultra-long-haul aircraft like the 777-10, while demand can be viewed as limited, and that's certainly evidenced by the 747's decline and even stretching to the struggles that the Airbus A380 experienced. Even the 777-9 is considered large for most routes and has struggled to secure widespread orders. Doesn't make it a failure, it just is the realization that aircraft of these sizes are only ever going to appeal to a niche amount of airlines, your more major international ones with colossal backing. While this was always going to be expected, it is an important factor to consider when analysing the pros and cons of a prospective stretch. Many airlines have already adjusted their fleets to really reflect the realities of modern air travel. Twin-aisle aircraft like the 787 and A350, which offer long-range and modern capacity, have become the go-to choices for most. The 777-10, if proceeded with, would have filled a niche, but by immediately being placed in a niche, it also would have seen a very tiny customer base, with likely just a handful of operators committing to the plane, like we've seen with other variants that were enhancements in the past. While the 777-10 in 2016 may have been considered a pretty easy plane to make a reality if required, I also think that justifying the development costs is another question entirely. And again, so much has changed since then. Developing a 777-10 would be a resource-intensive undertaking for Boeing, especially to replace the 747. Had Boeing wanted to proceed with such a stretch to replace the Queen of the Skies, it would have needed to commit to this plane sooner rather than later. However, worse still, had the plane maker proceeded with it in 2016, and all that would have, the fate of the stretch would have been up in the air, and a certification likely wouldn't have come until the 2030s, long after airlines would have retired their 747s, and at that point, something else may have been present. Given Boeing's challenges from finances to production and even just generally its employee base, a 777-10, while on paper as a worthy upgrade to the 747, wouldn't have necessarily made much sense logistically, with especially hindsight being key here. Furthermore, in the mid-2010s, Boeing is in no position to develop a new passenger variant for an aircraft type, and it can't even get its existing ones certified. The 777-8F is about as far as the manufacturer is publicly willing to go, and this was to address the freight market, it is important to note, not the passenger scene. The idea of a 777-10 to replace the 747 is certainly intriguing, but it is not without significant hurdles that have prevented this said plane from becoming a reality sooner. Ultimately, the decline of the 747 does reflect a broader shift in industry trends, which sees airlines prioritizing maybe your more smaller and efficient aircraft that offer them greater flexibility. While the 777X will play a massive role in the long-term future for many airlines' fleets, it is about as large as airlines and even manufacturers are willing to go at the moment, rather enhancing these high-capacity planes with maybe enhanced range. Some airlines that have retired the 747 have actually looked to the 777X program already as a replacement. British Airways and Lufthansa are the first two that come to mind, but they've stuck with the 777-9. The 777-10 did achieve technical feasibility and was quoted at being a relatively easy adjustment. However, now in the mid-2020s, this makes little to no sense given everything I've discussed. Is this a variant you would have liked to have seen, and if Boeing had actually proceeded with it, how do you think it really would have come to fruition, especially with all the related delays? Let me know down below in the comments. Take care, be safe, and I will indeed see you in a couple of days for your latest industry analysis.